in the burning sands of ancient arenas where the roar of 50,000 spectators could shake the very foundations of stone amphitheaters, warriors faced death with a courage that has echoed through the ages. These were the gladiators, men and women who stepped into the arena knowing they might never leave, yet who found in mortal combat a path to glory that transcended the boundaries between slave and citizen, barbarian and Roman, mortal and legend. The word gladiator derives from the Latin gladius, the short sword that became synonymous with Roman military might. But these arena fighters wielded far more than mere weapons. They carried the hopes and fears of an empire, the religious beliefs of ancient peoples, and the eternal human fascination with courage in the face of certain death. From the misty hills of ancient Etruria to the marble corridors of Imperial Rome, from the dusty training schools of Capua to the blood-soaked sands of the Colosseum, this is the complete story of the gladiator. It is a tale that spans 1,000 years, encompassing the rise and fall of civilizations, the transformation of funeral rites into political spectacle, and the emergence of history's first professional athletes, who competed not for gold or glory alone, but for the ultimate prize, life itself. Welcome to Dust and Glory, where we uncover the forgotten stories that shaped our world. Tonight we journey into the heart of the arena to discover how gladiatorial combat evolved from sacred Etruscan death rituals into the greatest entertainment spectacle the ancient world had ever seen, and why it ultimately fell to forces that proved mightier than any sword. Long before Romans packed the Colosseum to witness spectacular fights, the mysterious Etruscans had already established the fundamental framework that would define gladiatorial combat for centuries. In the shadowy world of Etruscan civilization, death was not merely an ending but a transition requiring elaborate ritual preparation. Their approach to honoring the dead through ritualized violence created the template from which Roman gladiatorial games would eventually emerge. The Etruscan practice of munus represented far more than entertainment. It constituted a sacred obligation to the deceased. When prominent Etruscan nobles died, their families organized elaborate funeral ceremonies that included the forced combat of prisoners of war, slaves, and condemned criminals. These fighters, known as bustuari, battled near the funeral pyre or tomb of the deceased, their spilled blood serving as an offering to ensure the dead person's successful journey to the afterlife. Archaeological evidence reveals that these funeral games occurred primarily during the burial ceremonies of wealthy aristocrats and political leaders. The Etruscans believed that the life force contained within blood possessed supernatural properties capable of nourishing the spirits of the dead. When warriors died in combat during these ceremonies, their vital essence supposedly transferred to the deceased noble, providing strength for the perilous journey through the underworld. The tomb paintings at Tarquinia provide the most comprehensive visual record of early Etruscan gladiatorial practices. The Tomb of the Augurs, dating to approximately 530 BCE, contains frescoes depicting a masked figure called Fersu, who appears to be controlling a combat scenario. This figure holds a long leash attached to a dog that attacks a man whose head is covered by a sack, while the victim attempts to defend himself with a club. More revealing are the paintings found in the Tomb of the Olympic Games at Tarquinia, which show armed combat between pairs of warriors wearing different types of protective gear. These fighters carry round shields, wear helmets with distinctive crests, and wield short swords similar to those later adopted by Roman gladiators. The artistic style and attention to detail in these frescoes indicate that the artists witnessed actual combat, as the positioning of the fighters, their defensive stances, and the realistic depiction of their equipment all suggest observation rather than imaginative interpretation. The religious significance of blood sacrifice permeated every aspect of Etruscan funeral practices. Their complex mythology described the afterlife as a dangerous realm populated by demons and hostile spirits that could prevent the deceased from reaching their final destination. The Etruscans believed that fresh human blood possessed the power to appease these malevolent entities and provide safe passage for the dead. Etruscan priests, known as haruspices, played crucial roles in determining the appropriate scale and timing of funeral games. These religious specialists examined the entrails of sacrificed animals to divine the wishes of the deceased and the requirements for successful passage to the afterlife. Their interpretations influenced decisions about how many fighters should participate, what types of combat would be most beneficial, and which specific rituals needed to accompany the bloodshed. The connection between Etruscan funeral games and their broader religious practices extended beyond simple blood sacrifice. The Etruscans worshipped a pantheon of underworld deities who demanded regular offerings of human life. Ater, their version of Hades, ruled over the realm of the dead and required tribute from the living to maintain cosmic balance. Tukulcha, a demon with the head of a vulture and snakes for hair, served as a psychopomp who guided souls through the underworld, but only if properly appeased through blood offering. Early Etruscan weapons and fighting techniques derived directly from their military traditions and battlefield experiences. Etruscan armies employed a variety of weapons including short-thrusting swords, javelins and battle axes, all of which appeared in funeral combat scenarios. The distinctive Etruscan helmet, characterized by its bronze construction and elaborate crest decorations, became a standard piece of gladiatorial equipment. The fighting styles employed in Etruscan funeral games reflected practical military techniques adapted for single combat. Warriors trained in the use of the gladius hispaniensis, a short sword that would eventually give its name to gladiators themselves. This weapon, measuring approximately 24 inches in length, proved ideal for close-quarters combat and allowed for both thrusting and slashing attacks. The training of fighters for Etruscan funeral games occurred in facilities that prefigured later Roman gladiatorial schools. Wealthy families maintained private training grounds where condemned prisoners learned basic combat techniques under the supervision of experienced warriors. These early ludi focused on teaching fundamental skills like weapon handling, defensive positioning, and basic attack combinations. The social structure surrounding Etruscan funeral games established many precedents that would persist throughout the history of gladiatorial combat. Wealthy families competed with each other to sponsor the most elaborate and memorable funeral games, using these events to display their social status and political influence. The scale of the games became a direct reflection of the family's wealth and importance within Etruscan society. The geographic spread of Etruscan funeral games throughout central Italy created regional variations in combat styles and religious practices. Northern Etruscan cities like Volterra and Fiesole developed preferences for heavily armored fighters, using traditional military equipment, while southern communities near Rome experimented with lighter armor and more mobile fighting techniques. The economic impact of Etruscan funeral games extended far beyond the immediate costs of weapons and fighters. Specialized craftsmen emerged to produce gladiatorial equipment, creating an industry that would eventually support thousands of workers throughout the Roman world. Bronzesmiths developed new techniques for creating lightweight yet durable armor, while weapon makers refined the design of swords and shields specifically for arena combat. The transformation from Etruscan sacred ritual to Roman political tool began with a single event that would reshape the ancient world's understanding of public entertainment. In 264 BCE, two Roman brothers, Marcus and Decimus Junius Brutus Pera, organized what would become the first recorded newness on Roman soil to honor their recently deceased father. The venue was the Forum Boarium, Rome's cattle market, where a temporary wooden arena was constructed to accommodate the spectacle. 3 pairs of fighters engaged in mortal combat, while hundreds of Roman citizens watched from hastily erected wooden benches. Their attention focused not on religious devotion but on the skill and courage displayed by the combatants. The Brutus brothers' decision to host gladiatorial games marked a calculated political move disguised as filial piety. Marcus Junius Brutus Pera had served as consul in 22 BCE and maintained significant political ambitions for his family line. The funeral games provided an opportunity to display the family's wealth, demonstrate their commitment to traditional values, and create a memorable spectacle that would enhance their reputation among Roman voters. Unlike the purely religious Etruscan ceremonies, this Roman adaptation incorporated elements designed to appeal to popular tastes and political sensibilities. The fighters selected for this inaugural Roman munus came from prisoners captured during recent military campaigns against the Samnites and Gauls. Roman military success had provided a steady supply of captives, and the Brutus family chose 6 men based on their fighting experience and physical capabilities. The combat itself followed Etruscan precedent, but incorporated distinctly Roman modification. Each fight began with the fighters saluting the deceased through a ritual gesture toward his funeral mask, which was prominently displayed near the combat area. The weapons provided included the standard Roman gladius, various shield types, and protective gear that would become characteristic of later gladiatorial equipment. Most significantly, the fights were not predetermined executions but genuine contests where skill and fortune determined the outcome, allowing some fighters to survive and potentially earn their freedom. The Roman audience's reaction to this first Munus exceeded all expectations. Citizens who had initially attended out of curiosity or social obligation found themselves captivated by the intensity of mortal combat. Following the success of the Brutus Games, other prominent Roman families began incorporating gladiatorial combat into their own funeral ceremony. The practice spread rapidly among the political elite, who recognized the opportunity to outdo their rivals through increasingly elaborate displays. Within 2 decades of the first Roman Munus, funeral games had become expected elements of aristocratic burial. The evolution from private funeral rites to public entertainment accelerated during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, as ambitious politicians discovered the electoral advantages of sponsoring gladiatorial games. The Roman system of annual magistrates created intense competition among candidates seeking popular support. Gladiatorial games provided an effective means of reaching large numbers of voters simultaneously, while creating lasting impressions of generosity and magnificence. Marcus Aemilius Scaurus exemplified this new approach to political advancement when he sponsored elaborate gladiatorial games during his campaign for the consulship in 11. Scaurus imported fighters from across the Mediterranean, including exotic combatants from Africa and Asia who fought with unfamiliar weapons and techniques. The games lasted for 3 consecutive days and featured over 50 individual contests, establishing a new standard for political spectacle. The role of the editor or sponsor of gladiatorial games became increasingly important as these events grew in scale and political significance. The editor bore complete responsibility for organizing, financing, and presenting the games, making crucial decisions about the number of fighters, the quality of equipment, and the duration of the spectacle. Successful editors developed reputations for generosity and good judgment, while those who sponsored disappointing games faced public ridicule and political consequences. The financial burden of sponsoring gladiatorial games created both opportunities and risks for ambitious politicians. Wealthy families could leverage their resources to stage spectacular events that generated enormous popular goodwill, but the costs involved could bankrupt less fortunate candidates. A single day of quality gladiatorial games might cost the equivalent of several years' income for a moderately wealthy Roman. The transformation of gladiatorial games from funeral rites to political tools required significant modifications to their organization and presentation. While maintaining the religious justification of honoring the dead, editors began scheduling games to coincide with electoral campaigns, religious festivals, and other politically advantageous occasions. The timing of games became as important as their content, with sponsors carefully calculating the optimal moment to maximize their political impact. The venues for gladiatorial games expanded beyond the traditional funeral settings to accommodate larger audiences and more elaborate spectacles. Temporary wooden amphitheaters were constructed in various locations throughout Rome, including the Campus Martius, the Forum Romanum, and purpose-built sites on the outskirts of the city. These structures featured increasingly sophisticated designs with multiple tiers of seating, protective barriers between the audience and combatants, and underground facilities for housing fighters and equipment. The professionalization of gladiatorial training emerged as a natural response to the growing demand for skilled fighters. The early system of using untrained prisoners and condemned criminals proved inadequate for providing the quality of combat that Roman audiences expected. Wealthy families and professional entrepreneurs began establishing formal training schools known as ludi, where fighters received systematic instruction in weapons handling, combat techniques, and arena performance. The Lanista system developed as the organizational framework for professional gladiatorial training. These entrepreneur trainers purchased slaves, prisoners, and volunteers to create stable rosters of fighters who could be hired out to editors for specific games. The most successful Lanista Sai operated multiple schools and maintained hundreds of gladiators, developing reputations for producing fighters of exceptional skill and entertainment value. The systematic training of gladiators required sophisticated institutions that could transform desperate prisoners, condemned criminals, and ambitious volunteers into skilled warriors capable of entertaining the most demanding Roman audiences. The great gladiatorial schools that emerged during the late Republic operated as complex military-industrial enterprises, combining elements of prison, military academy, and professional sports facility. The Ludus Magnus, constructed adjacent to the Flavian Amphitheatre during the reign of Domitian, exemplified the imperial approach to gladiatorial training and management. This massive facility housed approximately 3,000 gladiators in individual cells arranged around a central training arena that measured 200 feet by 30. The complex included specialized training areas for different gladiatorial types, medical facilities staffed by skilled physician, workshops for equipment maintenance and production, and administrative offices that managed the complex logistics of supplying fighters for games throughout the empire. The daily routine within imperial gladiatorial schools reflected the systematic approach that characterized Augustan administration across all aspects of government. Gladiators rose before dawn for morning exercises that included running, calisthenics, and weapons practice, with wooden training equipment. The morning session emphasized physical conditioning and basic skill development, preparing fighters for the more intensive combat training that occupied the afternoon hours. The training weapons employed at imperial gladiatorial schools were crafted specifically for instruction purposes, featuring increased weight and modified designs that built strength while teaching proper technique. The wooden gladius used by novice fighters weighed nearly twice as much as combat weapons, forcing trainees to develop the arm and shoulder strength necessary for extended sword work while learning correct grip, stance, and striking pattern. The palace training system formed the foundation of gladiatorial combat instruction, utilizing wooden posts of varying heights and configurations to teach fundamental attack and defense technique. Each gladiatorial type trained against specifically designed posts that replicated the dimensions and characteristics of their typical opponents. Retiatori practiced net casting and trident work against posts, equipped with projecting arms that simulated human limbs, while secateurs developed their aggressive pursuit tactics against posts, positioned to represent net fighters in various defensive positions. The progression from basic palace work to advanced combat training followed carefully structured curricula that gradually increased complexity and intensity as fighters demonstrated competence at each level. Novice gladiators spent their first months mastering fundamental movements, footwork patterns, and weapon handling skills before advancing to partner exercises with other trainees. The specialized training areas within major gladiatorial schools reflected the diverse requirements of different fighter types and the sophisticated understanding of combat techniques that had evolved through centuries of arena experience. The Ludus Magnus included separate training courts for net fighters where retiatori could practice their mobility-based tactics in spaces that replicated arena dimensions and surface conditions. The medical care provided within gladiatorial schools represented one of the most advanced healthcare systems available in the ancient world, reflecting both the substantial economic investment represented by trained fighters and the practical necessity of maintaining their health and combat effectiveness. Each major school employed teams of specialized physicians known as medici, who had developed expertise in treating the specific types of injuries and health problems associated with intensive combat training and arena fighting. The gladiatorial physicians' medical knowledge encompassed sophisticated understanding of human anatomy derived from their extensive experience treating combat wounds and observing the effects of various weapons on the human body. These doctors could perform complex surgical procedures, including the repair of severed tendons, the treatment of internal injuries caused by blunt force trauma, and the management of infected wounds that would often prove fatal without proper care. The nutritional programs developed for gladiatorial training reflected advanced understanding of the dietary requirements for maintaining peak physical condition while supporting the rapid healing of training injuries. The gladiatorial diet emphasized high-protein foods, including meat, fish, eggs, and dairy products that provided the building blocks for muscle development and repair. The social hierarchy within gladiatorial schools reflected both the military origins of their organizational structure and the complex relationships between different categories of personnel required for effective operation. At the apex of each school's hierarchy stood the lanista, typically a wealthy freedman or businessman who owned the facility and bore ultimate responsibility for its financial success and operational effectiveness. The magistri served as the senior administrative officials within each school, handling the complex logistics of housing, feeding, and training hundreds of fighters, while maintaining the detailed records required for effective management. These officials typically possessed extensive experience in gladiatorial affairs, often having served as successful fighters themselves before transitioning to administrative roles. The doctors represented the elite tier of gladiatorial instructors, master fighters who had earned their freedom through exceptional arena performance and demonstrated the teaching ability necessary to pass their skills to new generations of gladiators. Each doctor specialized in specific gladiatorial types or combat techniques, developing expertise that made them invaluable for training fighters in their particular areas of knowledge. The relationship between doctors and their students involved complex dynamics that combined military discipline with the personal mentorship necessary for developing elite combat skills. Successful doctors learned to balance harsh training methods that built physical and mental toughness with the encouragement and technical guidance that allowed fighters to reach their full potential. Veteran gladiators who had survived multiple arena contests but had not yet earned their freedom occupied an intermediate position within the school hierarchy, serving as assistant instructors, equipment specialists, and mentors for newer fighters. These experienced gladiators possessed practical knowledge of arena combat that could not be taught through theoretical instruction. The tirocinium or novice gladiators formed the largest population within most schools and represented the greatest investment of training resources and instructional attention. These new fighters came from diverse backgrounds, including military prisoners, condemned criminals, purchased slaves, and voluntary recruits who had signed contracts surrendering their legal rights in exchange for the opportunity to earn money and potentially achieve fame through arena success. The sophisticated gladiatorial system that emerged during the late Republican period represented far more than random violence. It constituted a carefully orchestrated ballet of death, where each fighter's role was precisely defined by their equipment, training, and tactical approach. The evolution from crude funeral combats to refined arena spectacles required the development of specialized gladiatorial types, each designed to exploit specific advantages while creating vulnerabilities that opponents could target. The most iconic and strategically sophisticated matchup in gladiatorial history pitted the Retiarius against the Secutor, a pairing that embodied the fundamental tension between mobility and protection, range and power. The Retiarius, literally net man, entered the arena virtually naked except for a subligaculum and a protective manica covering his left arm and shoulder. His primary weapons included a weighted net approximately 12 feet square with lead weights sewn into its edges, a three-pronged trident measuring roughly 6 feet in length, and a curved dagger worn at his belt as a backup weapon. This minimal equipment loadout prioritized speed, agility, and reach over defensive protection. The Retiarius' fighting technique centered on maintaining distance while using his net to entangle and disable his opponent. The weighted edges of the net could deliver stunning blows when swung with sufficient force, while the mesh itself could trap weapons, limbs, or entire opponents if deployed skillfully. The trident served multiple tactical purposes. Its long reach allowed the Retiarius to maintain safe distance while probing for openings. Its three prongs could catch and deflect incoming sword strikes, and its sharp points could inflict serious wounds if the opponent became entangled or exposed. The tactical approach of the Retiarius required exceptional footwork and spatial awareness. These fighters trained extensively in lateral movement, backpedaling, and rapid directional changes to avoid their opponent's charges, while maintaining optimal striking distance. The most skilled Retiarii could cast their nets with remarkable accuracy, targeting specific body parts or weapon arms to create immediate tactical advantages. The Secutor, whose name meant pursuer or chaser, was specifically designed to counter the Retiarius' tactical advantages through heavy armor and aggressive pursuit tactics. The Secutor's helmet represented a masterpiece of functional design. Its smooth, rounded surface featured minimal protrusions that could catch a net, while small eye holes limited peripheral vision, but prevented trident prongs from penetrating the face guard. The Secutor's body armor included a heavy rectangular shield measuring approximately 4 feet in height and 2.5 feet in width, constructed from laminated wood strips covered with leather and reinforced with metal edging. This shield provided comprehensive protection for the torso and legs, while serving as an offensive weapon for shield punches and battering attacks. The strategic dynamic between Retiarius and Secutor created a compelling tactical puzzle that varied with each encounter. The Secutor's primary objective involved closing distance quickly while avoiding or deflecting net attacks, then using his superior armor and close-quarters weaponry to overwhelm his lightly protected opponent. This required aggressive forward movement combined with defensive shield work to deflect trident strikes and avoid net entanglement. The Retiarius countered these tactics through superior mobility and range management, using the arena's space to maintain optimal fighting distance while wearing down his heavily armored opponent. The weight of the Secutor's equipment created endurance disadvantages that skilled Retiarii could exploit through prolonged engagements. The heavily armored gladiatorial types represented a different tactical philosophy, emphasizing protection and close-quarters combat over mobility and range. The Murmillo derived his name from the distinctive fish-shaped crest adorning his helmet, which featured a broad brim to deflect downward strikes, and a face guard with adequate eye holes for peripheral vision. The Murmillo's equipment closely resembled that of a Roman legionary, including the large rectangular scutum, short gladius, and comprehensive arm and leg protection. This gladiatorial type appealed to Roman audiences' military pride and represented the citizen soldier ideal in arena combat. The Murmillo fighting style emphasized disciplined shield work and systematic sword techniques derived from Roman military training. These fighters excelled at defensive positioning, using their large shields to create protected zones while probing for openings with measured sword strike. The Murmillo's training included formation fighting techniques adapted for single combat, such as shield binding and systematic advance patterns that maintained defensive integrity while closing distance. The Thrax, representing the fighting traditions of Thrace, presented a markedly different tactical profile despite similar levels of armor protection. The Thrax helmet featured a distinctive griffin or sphinx crest and a wide brim design that provided excellent protection against overhead strikes. The most characteristic element of Thrax equipment was the curved Thracian sword, which measured approximately 2 feet in length and featured a pronounced forward curve that concentrated cutting power while allowing strikes around shield edges. The Thrax carried a small square or round shield that measured roughly 2 feet in diameter, significantly smaller than the Murmillo's scutum. This reduced shield size reflected the Thrax's emphasis on offensive action and mobility over purely defensive tactics. The fighter wore high greaves extending above the knee on both legs, providing comprehensive lower body protection that compensated for the smaller shield's reduced coverage. The fighting techniques employed by the Thrax exploited the curved sword's unique properties through slashing attacks that could bypass conventional shield defenses. The weapon's design allowed for hooking motions that could pull aside opponents' shields or catch weapon arms, creating openings for follow-up strikes. The tactical philosophy of the Thrax emphasized aggressive offensive action supported by superior mobility and weapon versatility. These fighters excelled at creating and exploiting momentary openings through rapid combinations of strikes, feints and positional changes. The smaller shield required exceptional timing and spatial awareness, as Thrax fighters had to actively intercept attacks rather than relying on passive protection. The Hoplomachus represented the Greek military tradition within the Roman arena system. Equipped with a spear as his primary weapon supplemented by a short sword for close-quarters combat, the Hoplomachus helmet featured a distinctive crest and face protection similar to Greek hoplite equipment, while his small round shield measured approximately 3 feet in diameter. The spear techniques employed by the Hoplomachus drew directly from Greek phalanx fighting traditions adapted for single combat. These fighters trained in various spear grips and attack angles, using the weapon's 8-foot length to control distance while delivering powerful thrusting attacks. The spear's versatility allowed for sweeping strikes against opponents' legs, overhead attacks targeting the head and shoulders, and defensive techniques that could deflect or bind opponents' weapons. The tactical challenges facing the Hoplomachus centered on managing the transition between spear and sword combat when opponents successfully closed distance. These fighters developed sophisticated techniques for using their shield and spear together, creating defensive barriers while maintaining offensive capability. The specialized gladiatorial categories represented the arena system's capacity for innovation and spectacle beyond traditional infantry combat. The Equites brought mounted warfare into the amphitheater, fighting on horseback with spears, swords and small round shields. These contests typically began with mounted phases where fighters engaged in cavalry tactics, including charging attacks, wheeling maneuvers and projectile exchange. The equipment and training requirements for Equites exceeded those of other gladiatorial types due to the complexity of mounted combat. These fighters needed exceptional horsemanship skills combined with weapons proficiency, as controlling a horse while engaging in combat demanded years of specialized training. The horses themselves required conditioning for arena combat, becoming accustomed to crowds, noise and the stress of violent encounter. The Essersdairy recreated British chariot warfare within Roman arenas, providing audiences with exotic combat spectacles that showcased the military traditions of recently conquered territory. These fighters operated two-man chariots with one individual serving as driver while the other fought with spears, swords and shields. The tactical complexity of chariot combat required exceptional coordination between team members, as the driver's skill directly influenced the fighter's tactical options and survival chances. The Dimacharius represented the ultimate expression of offensive gladiatorial combat, fighting with two swords simultaneously instead of using a shield for protection. These fighters wore minimal armor, typically limited to arm guards and leg protection, relying entirely on weapon skill and mobility for survival. The dual sword fighting style required exceptional ambidextrous training, as fighters had to coordinate attacks and defenses with both hands while maintaining proper footwork and positioning. The amphitheatres that had become symbols of Roman power and entertainment would witness their most dramatic challenge not from external enemies but from the very performers who had filled them with blood and spectacle. The Third Servile War erupted in the spring of 73 BCE at the gladiatorial school of Lentulus Batiatus in Capua, transforming what began as a desperate escape attempt into the largest slave rebellion in Roman history. The revolt's origins lay in the harsh conditions and brutal treatment that characterized even the most prestigious gladiatorial establishments, where fighters trained under constant threat of death while generating enormous profits for their owners. Lentulus Batiatus operated one of Capua's most successful gladiatorial schools, housing approximately 200 fighters in a fortified compound that combined training facilities, living quarters, and security measures designed to prevent escapes. The school's reputation rested on its ability to produce skilled gladiators who commanded premium prices in arenas throughout southern Italy. Batiatus invested heavily in equipment, training, and medical care for his fighters, but this business-minded approach coexisted with the fundamental reality that gladiators remained property to be exploited, punished, and ultimately sacrificed for entertainment. The conditions within Batiatus's school reflected the contradictions inherent in the gladiatorial system. Fighters received adequate nutrition, professional medical care, and systematic combat training that often exceeded the preparation available to Roman soldiers. However, they lived under constant surveillance, faced severe punishments for minor infractions, and knew that their survival depended entirely on their ability to entertain audiences who viewed them as expendable performers. Spartacus emerged as the rebellion's primary leader through a combination of military experience, personal charisma, and tactical intelligence that distinguished him from his fellow gladiators. Historical sources describe him as a Thracian who had served in the Roman auxiliary forces before being captured and enslaved, though the exact circumstances of his enslavement remain unclear. His military background provided crucial knowledge of Roman tactical methods, organizational structures, and strategic thinking that would prove invaluable in transforming a prison break into a sustained military campaign. The initial escape plan involved approximately 70 gladiators who had been selected for execution or particularly harsh punishment, making their situation desperate enough to justify the enormous risks of rebellion. The conspirators included fighters from various ethnic backgrounds and gladiatorial specializations, creating a diverse group with different combat skills and military experience. Crixus, a Gallic gladiator known for his skill as a murmillo, brought knowledge of Celtic warfare tactics and experience fighting against Roman forces in Gaul. Oenomus, another Gallic fighter, contributed additional military expertise and helped coordinate the diverse group of rebels during the crucial early stages of the revolt. The escape itself occurred when the gladiators overpowered their guards during a training session, seizing weapons from the school's armory, and fighting their way out of the compound. The rebels initially armed themselves with gladiatorial equipment, including swords, shields, and armor, but quickly supplemented these weapons with kitchen knives, tools, and improvised weapons that provided additional combat capability. The immediate aftermath of the escape demonstrated the rebels' understanding that their survival depended on rapid expansion and strategic mobility rather than attempting to hold fixed positions. The gladiators moved quickly to Mount Vesuvius, approximately 20 miles southeast of Capua, where the volcanic terrain provided natural defensive advantages and multiple escape routes if Roman forces attempted to surround them. The mountain slopes offered caves for shelter, springs for water, and elevated positions that allowed the rebels to observe approaching enemies while remaining concealed from Roman scouts. The rebels' initial military strategy focused on guerrilla warfare tactics that exploited their superior knowledge of local terrain and their opponents' overconfidence. Spartacus and his fellow leaders recognized that direct confrontation with Roman legions would result in immediate defeat, so they adopted hit-and-run tactics designed to inflict casualties while avoiding decisive battle. These operations targeted isolated Roman patrols, supply convoys and small garrisons, allowing the rebels to acquire additional weapons and equipment, while demonstrating their military capabilities to potential recruits. The recruitment of additional followers occurred through a combination of military success and appeals to the widespread discontent among slaves, rural laborers and dispossessed farmers throughout southern Italy. The rebels' victories against Roman forces created a reputation for invincibility that attracted desperate individuals seeking escape from poverty, debt or slavery. The composition of Spartacus's army evolved rapidly from its gladiatorial origins to encompass a diverse coalition of the dispossessed and marginal. Rural slaves who worked on large agricultural estates formed the largest single group of recruits, bringing knowledge of local geography and supply sources along with deep resentment against their Roman master. The rebels' military organization reflected Spartacus's understanding of Roman tactical principles adapted for irregular warfare. The army was divided into specialized units based on ethnic background and combat experience, allowing each group to fight according to their traditional methods while maintaining overall coordination. Gallic and Germanic fighters formed heavy infantry units, armed with captured Roman equipment, while Thracian and other Balkan fighters specialized in light infantry tactics, emphasizing mobility and harassment. Former gladiators served as elite shock troops whose professional combat skills provided crucial advantages in close-quarters fighting. The tactical innovations employed by Spartacus's forces demonstrate his sophisticated understanding of both conventional and irregular warfare principles. The rebels developed techniques for coordinating multiple small units in complex operations, using signal systems and predetermined rally points to maintain communication across extended battlefield. The rebels' success in several early engagements against Roman forces sent shockwaves through the Republic's political establishment, and demonstrated the serious military threat posed by the uprising. The defeat of Praetor Claudius Glaber's forces on Mount Vesuvius provided the rebellion's first major victory and established Spartacus's reputation as a capable military commander. Glaber had positioned his troops to blockade the mountain's main access routes, confident that the rebels could be starved into submission without requiring direct assault. However, Spartacus's forces descended the mountain's steep rear slopes using ropes woven from vine branches, circling behind the Roman positions and launching a surprise attack that routed Glaber's unprepared troops. This victory provided the rebels with substantial quantities of military equipment, including professional weapons, armor, and supplies that transformed them from desperate fugitives into a legitimate military force. The captured equipment allowed Spartacus to arm additional recruits with standardized weapons, while providing his core gladiatorial fighters with superior gear that enhanced their already formidable combat capability. The defeat of Praetor Publius Varinius's larger force near Mount Vesuvius confirmed the rebels' military competence and forced Roman authorities to recognize the seriousness of the threat. Varinius had assembled a more substantial army including regular legionary units and auxiliary forces, confident that professional Roman troops could easily defeat a rabble of escaped slaves. However, Spartacus's tactical acumen and his followers' desperate motivation proved superior to Roman overconfidence and conventional tactics. The rebels used their superior mobility to avoid direct confrontation while launching coordinated attacks against isolated Roman detachments, gradually wearing down Varinius's forces through accumulated casualties and demoralization. The expansion of the rebellion throughout southern Italy during 73 and 72 BCE demonstrated the widespread social tensions and economic grievances that the slave uprising had unleashed. The rebels' military successes encouraged slave revolts on individual estates, urban uprisings in several cities, and the emergence of bandit groups that claimed affiliation with Spartacus's movement. The internal dynamics within the rebel army revealed tensions between different strategic approaches and long-term objectives that would ultimately contribute to the rebellion's failure. Spartacus advocated for a strategic withdrawal from Italy, arguing that the rebels should cross the Alps and return to their homelands where they could live as free men beyond Roman reach. Crixus and many of the Gallic fighters disagreed with Spartacus's strategic assessment, preferring to remain in Italy where they could continue inflicting damage on Roman interests while recruiting additional followers. The Gauls' decision reflected both their confidence in their military capabilities and their desire for revenge against Roman oppression. This strategic disagreement led to a division of the rebel army, with Crixus leading approximately 30,000 followers in continued operations throughout southern Italy, while Spartacus moved north with the remainder of the force. The separation of rebel forces provided Roman commanders with the opportunity to defeat them separately through concentrated attacks against divided opponents. Marcus Licinius Crassus, who assumed command of Roman operations against the rebellion in 72 BCE, recognized that the divided rebel army presented tactical opportunities that had been absent when Spartacus maintained unified command. Crassus possessed the military experience, financial resources, and political motivation necessary to organize an effective campaign against the rebels. Having served with distinction during Sulla's civil wars and accumulated substantial wealth through real estate speculation and slave trading, Crassus's approach to suppressing the rebellion combined traditional Roman military methods with innovative tactics designed specifically to counter the rebels' guerrilla warfare strategy. He assembled an army of 8 legions, approximately 40,000 men, including both veteran troops and newly recruited soldiers whose training emphasized the discipline and coordination necessary for operations against irregular forces. The defeat of Crixus's forces by Crassus's lieutenant Arius near Mount Garganus eliminated approximately 1/3 of the rebel army and provided the Romans with their first major victory of the campaign. Crixus's death in this battle deprived the rebellion of one of its most capable military leaders, while demonstrating that Roman forces could defeat rebel armies when they abandoned guerrilla tactics for conventional warfare. Spartacus's response to Crixus's defeat demonstrated both his tactical flexibility and his understanding of the psychological dimensions of military leadership. Rather than retreating immediately, he organized a memorial ceremony for the fallen Gallic leader that included gladiatorial games featuring captured Roman prisoners. This event served multiple purposes: honoring Crixus according to traditional funeral customs, providing entertainment and emotional release for the rebel army, and demonstrating contempt for Roman authority through the symbolic reversal of gladiatorial role. The rebels' continued northward movement through central Italy during 72 BCE created panic in Rome as Spartacus's army approached the capital region. The proximity of a hostile force capable of defeating Roman armies generated fears of direct assault on the city itself, though Spartacus showed no interest in attempting such an operation. Instead, the rebel army continued toward the Alps, apparently maintaining the strategic objective of escaping Italian territory entirely. However, the reasons for the army's eventual turn back towards southern Italy remain unclear, with various explanations including disagreements among rebel leaders, difficulties in crossing the Alpine passes, or changes in strategic assessment. The rebels' return to southern Italy provided Crassus with the opportunity to implement comprehensive strategy for ending the rebellion through systematic military pressure combined with economic warfare. Crassus ordered the construction of fortifications across the narrow neck of the Bruttium Peninsula, creating a barrier that trapped Spartacus's army in the southern tip of Italy. This engineering project, spanning approximately 35 miles from coast to coast, included ditches, earthworks, and palisades that required substantial labor and resources, but effectively limited the rebels' mobility and strategic options. The siege tactics employed by Crassus represented innovative applications of traditional Roman military engineering to irregular warfare situations. The fortifications included watchtowers, patrol routes, and supply depots that allowed Roman forces to maintain continuous pressure on the trapped rebels while minimizing their own casualties. Spartacus's attempts to break through the Roman fortifications resulted in several fierce battles that demonstrated both the rebels' desperate courage and the effectiveness of Roman defensive preparation. The rebels constructed rafts and boats in attempts to cross to Sicily, where they hoped to incite slave revolts that would provide additional recruits and strategic options. However, these naval operations failed due to Roman naval patrols and the rebels' limited maritime capability. The final campaign of the Third Servile War occurred during the spring of 71 BCE, when Spartacus led his remaining forces in a desperate attempt to break through Roman lines and escape northward. The rebels' last major battle took place in Lucania, where Spartacus personally led cavalry charges against Roman positions in efforts to create gaps through which his infantry could advance. Contemporary accounts describe Spartacus fighting with exceptional courage and skill,
killing 2 Roman centurions in personal combat before being overwhelmed by superior numbers and killed along with most of his army. The aftermath of the rebellion's suppression revealed the extent of Roman determination to prevent future slave uprisings through exemplary punishment and intimidation. Crassus ordered the crucifixion of 6,000 captured rebels along the Appian Way between Capua and Rome, creating a 120-mile corridor of death that served as a permanent reminder of the consequences of challenging Roman authority. The crucifixions continued for several days, with victims displayed at regular intervals to ensure maximum visibility for travelers using the major highway.
The crushing defeat of Spartacus and his followers along the Appian Way marked the end of gladiatorial rebellion, but it also ushered in an era where emperors would harness the arena's power for their own political survival and imperial legitimacy. Augustus, the first Roman emperor, understood that controlling gladiatorial games meant controlling the hearts and minds of the Roman populace. His systematic regulation of these spectacles transformed them from aristocratic funeral rites and political tools into instruments of imperial propaganda that would define the relationship between ruler and ruled for the next 2 centuries. Augustus's approach to gladiatorial regulation began with the Lex Julia de Vir Publica in 18 BCE, which established imperial oversight over all public entertainment in Rome and throughout the provinces. This legislation required official approval for any gladiatorial games exceeding a certain scale, effectively ending the era when ambitious politicians could sponsor massive spectacles to advance their careers. The law designated specific magistrates responsible for overseeing game organization, standardizing safety protocols, and ensuring that spectacles served imperial rather than personal political objectives. Augustus personally reviewed applications for major games, using his approval or denial as rewards and punishments for provincial governors and local elites. The emperor's personal involvement in gladiatorial affairs extended beyond mere administrative oversight, to include detailed regulations governing fighter treatment, combat procedures, and audience management. Augustus established minimum standards for gladiatorial equipment, requiring that weapons meet specific quality benchmarks, and that protective gear provide adequate safety without compromising entertainment value. He mandated regular medical examinations for fighters, created standardized training protocols for different gladiatorial types, and instituted appeals processes that allowed skilled gladiators to petition for freedom based on their service records and combat achievement. The economic framework governing gladiatorial games under Augustus reflected the emperor's broader efforts to stabilize Roman society through systematic regulation and imperial patronage. The state assumed direct control over major gladiatorial schools, purchasing existing ludi from private owners, and establishing new training facilities under imperial management. These imperial schools, known as ludi imperiales, operated according to standardized procedures that emphasized professional training, adequate medical care, and systematic fighter development, rather than the profit-maximizing approaches that had characterized private enterprises. The underground tunnel connecting the Ludus Magnus to the Colosseum represented a masterpiece of practical engineering that allowed gladiators to move directly from their training facility to the arena without exposure to crowds or potential escape opportunity. This tunnel, measuring approximately 20 feet in width and extending nearly 200 yards, featured multiple security checkpoints, guard stations, and holding areas where fighters could prepare for combat while remaining under constant supervision. The tunnel's design included ventilation systems that provided adequate air circulation and drainage channels that prevented flooding during Rome's winter rains. The Flavian dynasty's approach to gladiatorial spectacle represented the culmination of imperial control over arena entertainment, combining massive public investment with unprecedented theatrical sophistication. Vespasian's decision to construct the Flavian amphitheatre on the site of Nero's private lake carried profound symbolic significance, transforming a despised emperor's personal pleasure ground into a venue where ordinary citizens could witness spectacular entertainment funded by imperial generosity. Titus's inaugural games for the completed Colosseum in 80 CEA established new standards for imperial spectacle that would influence gladiatorial presentations for centuries. The 100-day celebration featured approximately 3,000 gladiatorial contests involving fighters drawn from schools throughout the empire, creating a tournament atmosphere that showcased the diversity and skill of imperial gladiatorial training program. The games included representatives of every major gladiatorial type, exotic fighters from recently conquered territories, and special exhibitions featuring unusual weapon combinations and combat scenarios designed specifically for the inaugural celebration. The logistical challenges of organizing Titus's Centennial Games required unprecedented coordination between imperial administrators, gladiatorial schools, and support services throughout the Roman world. Transportation arrangements brought fighters from Britain, Germany, Africa and Asia to Rome, along with their specialized equipment, training staff and medical personnel. The games required approximately 500,000 pounds of sand to cover the arena floor throughout the celebration, along with massive quantities of food for both participants and spectators, medical supplies for treating inevitable injuries, and security arrangements for managing crowds that often exceeded the amphitheater's normal capacity. The animal hunts that accompanied Titus's gladiatorial games demonstrated the empire's reach and the emperor's ability to command exotic resources from the furthest corners of Roman territory. The celebrations featured lions from Africa, tigers from Asia, bears from Germany, and elephants from both Africa and India, along with more unusual animals like rhinoceros, hippopotamus, and various species of antelope and deer. The procurement of these animals required extensive networks of hunters, trappers and animal traders who specialized in capturing and transporting dangerous wildlife across vast distances while maintaining their health and aggressive instinct. The staging of animal hunts within the Colosseum involved complex theatrical presentations that transformed simple killing into elaborate entertainment spectacles. Trajan's Dacian triumph celebrations in 10-7 CE surpassed even Titus's inaugural games in scale and extravagance, featuring approximately 10,000 gladiators in contests that extended over 20. The emperor's recent conquest of Dacia had provided enormous wealth in the form of gold mines and territorial tribute, along with thousands of prisoners who could be trained as gladiators or used in mass executions that demonstrated Roman military superiority. The scale of Trajan's gladiatorial celebrations required establishing temporary training facilities and housing arrangements throughout Rome and its surrounding territories to accommodate the massive number of participants. Existing gladiatorial schools could not house 10,000 fighters simultaneously, forcing imperial administrators to commandeer military barracks, construct temporary housing complexes, and establish satellite training facilities where fighters could maintain their skills while awaiting their scheduled appearance. The variety of gladiatorial contests presented during Trajan's games reflected the emperor's desire to showcase the diversity of the Roman Empire and the effectiveness of imperial training programs in creating skilled fighters from diverse ethnic backgrounds. The celebrations featured traditional matchups between standard gladiatorial types, alongside exotic presentations involving fighters trained in regional combat styles from newly conquered territory. Dacian warriors fought with their traditional curved swords and distinctive armor, while German tribesmen demonstrated their prowess with long swords and wooden shields. These ethnic presentations served both as entertainment and as demonstrations of Roman military superiority over conquered people. The role of gladiatorial combat in imperial propaganda extended beyond simple entertainment to encompass sophisticated messaging about Roman values, imperial benevolence, and the emperor's personal relationship with his subjects. Successful gladiatorial games demonstrated the emperor's generosity in providing expensive entertainment, his concern for public welfare through the employment of thousands of workers in game-related industry, and his commitment to traditional Roman values embodied in the courage and skill displayed by arena fighters. The emperor's personal attendance at gladiatorial games carried enormous symbolic weight, demonstrating his accessibility to ordinary citizens and his participation in traditional Roman cultural activity. The imperial box within major amphitheaters was designed to maximize the emperor's visibility, while ensuring adequate security, creating a theatrical setting where the ruler could display appropriate responses to arena action, while maintaining the dignity required by his position. The emperor's gestures during gladiatorial contests, his decisions about life and death for defeated fighters, his reactions to particularly skillful performances, his interactions with the crowd were carefully observed and interpreted as indicators of his character and fitness for rule. The development of imperial gladiatorial ceremonies included standardized rituals that reinforced the emperor's authority while creating predictable frameworks for public interaction between ruler and subject. The imperial enthusiasm for personal participation in gladiatorial activities began with Caligula, whose fascination with arena combat reflected both genuine interest in the sport and calculated efforts to enhance his popular appeal through association with beloved entertainment. Caligula frequently attended training sessions at gladiatorial schools where he observed combat techniques, and occasionally participated in practice sessions using blunted weapons and protective equipment. These visits were carefully choreographed to demonstrate the emperor's physical courage and martial skills, while avoiding the genuine risks associated with actual combat. Caligula's involvement in gladiatorial activities extended to direct participation in arena exhibitions where he fought against carefully selected opponents under controlled conditions that ensured his safety while creating the appearance of genuine combat. These performances featured the emperor equipped with high-quality weapons and armor facing opponents who were instructed to provide entertaining resistance without seriously threatening imperial safety. The contests were presented as demonstrations of the emperor's martial prowess and personal courage, though informed observers understood the artificial nature of these exhibitions. The political implications of Caligula's gladiatorial activities generated controversy among Roman elites who viewed such behavior as beneath imperial dignity and potentially damaging to the emperor's authority. Traditional Roman values emphasized the distinction between rulers and entertainers, and the emperor's participation in arena activities blurred these boundaries in ways that some considered inappropriate for the holder of supreme political power. However, Caligula's gladiatorial performances proved popular with ordinary citizens who appreciated the emperor's willingness to participate personally in their favorite entertainment. Nero's relationship with gladiatorial combat reflected his broader interest in theatrical performance and public spectacle, though his approach differed significantly from Caligula's more direct participation in arena fight. Nero preferred to sponsor elaborate gladiatorial presentations that showcased his artistic vision and creative abilities, often incorporating theatrical elements, musical performances, and dramatic narratives that transformed traditional combat into complex entertainment spectacle. These innovations appealed to audiences who appreciated novelty and sophistication while maintaining the fundamental elements of gladiatorial combat that defined the genre. Nero's gladiatorial innovations included the introduction of female fighters known as gladiatrices, who performed in specially designed contests that combined traditional combat techniques with theatrical presentations emphasizing grace, skill, and feminine beauty. These female gladiators were typically drawn from upper-class women who voluntarily entered the arena for the excitement and social attention it provided, rather than from slaves or condemned criminals who formed the majority of male fight. The gladiatrices received specialized training that adapted traditional gladiatorial techniques for female physiology, while maintaining the entertainment value and competitive intensity that audiences expect. Female fighters typically specialized in lighter weapon combinations that emphasized speed and agility over raw power, though some gladiatrices mastered the same equipment used by their male counterparts. The training of female gladiators required modifications to standard gladiatorial instruction that accommodated differences in strength, reach, and fighting style while maintaining competitive balance and entertainment value. The most successful female gladiators developed distinctive fighting styles that played to their strengths, while creating visually appealing performances that satisfied audience expectations for both combat skill and aesthetic presentation. Commodus represented the ultimate expression of imperial gladiatorial enthusiasm, participating in hundreds of arena contests throughout his reign, while transforming the emperor's relationship with gladiatorial combat from occasional patronage to obsessive personal involvement. Unlike his predecessors who treated arena participation as political theater, Commodus genuinely considered himself a professional gladiator and demanded recognition for his fighting skills and arena achievement. His participation in gladiatorial combat reflected both personal psychological needs and calculated political strategy designed to enhance his popularity with the masses, who formed his primary base of political support. The emperor's gladiatorial career began with private training sessions within the imperial palace, where he learned combat techniques from professional instructors, while developing the physical conditioning required for arena fighting. Commodus employed some of the empire's most skilled gladiatorial trainers who provided individual instruction in various fighting styles, while adapting their teaching methods to accommodate the unique requirements of training an emperor. These sessions were conducted in complete secrecy to prevent political opponents from learning about the emperor's unconventional interests and using them for propaganda purposes. Commodus's public gladiatorial performances were carefully staged to ensure his safety while creating the appearance of genuine combat that would satisfy audience expectations and enhance his reputation as a skilled fighter. The emperor typically fought against opponents who were instructed to provide entertaining resistance, while avoiding any actions that might seriously injure or kill him.
These contests featured high-quality weapons and armor that provided adequate protection while maintaining the visual appeal and apparent danger that made gladiatorial combat exciting for spectators. The political consequences of Commodus's gladiatorial activities proved ultimately destructive to his reign, and contributed to the broader crisis that would eventually end the Antonine dynasty. His obsession with arena combat distracted him from the administrative responsibilities of imperial rule while alienating senatorial and equestrian classes who viewed his behavior as undignified and inappropriate for an emperor. The substantial resources devoted to gladiatorial activity, including the construction of private training facilities and the employment of hundreds of specialized personnel, diverted funds from more pressing imperial needs, while generating resentment among taxpayers who bore the costs of the emperor's expensive hobby.
The transformation of gladiatorial combat from temporary wooden stages to permanent stone monuments began with the recognition that these spectacles had become essential elements of Roman political and social life. The construction of the Flavian amphitheatre, known today as the Colosseum, represented the culmination of centuries of architectural evolution and engineering innovation that turned arena entertainment into a precise science of crowd management, theatrical presentation, and mechanical sophistication. The Flavian amphitheatre's construction commenced under Emperor Vespasian around 70 CE on the site of Nero's artificial lake within the Domus Aurelia complex. This location choice carried profound political symbolism. The despised emperor's private pleasure ground would be transformed into a public venue where ordinary Roman citizens could witness spectacular entertainment. The project required draining the lake, excavating foundations to a depth of approximately 40 feet below ground level, and establishing a complex system of drainage channels that would prevent flooding during Rome's frequent winter rains. The amphitheatre's elliptical design measured 620 feet in length, 513 feet in width, and rose to a height of 107 feet through 4 distinct architectural stories. The exterior facade employed a systematic arrangement of architectural orders: Doric columns on the ground level, Ionic on the second story, and Corinthian on the third, with Corinthian pilasters adorning the 4th level. This progression created visual harmony, while demonstrating Roman mastery of Greek architectural principles adapted for their own monumental purposes. The structural engineering of the Flavian amphitheatre relied on innovative load-bearing techniques that distributed the enormous weight of the building through a complex system of radial walls, barrel vaults, and cross vaults constructed from Roman concrete. The foundation consisted of massive travertine blocks quarried from Tivoli, while the upper levels employed lighter tufa stone and brick to reduce overall structural stress. The arena floor itself measured approximately 287 feet by 180 feet, and was covered with wooden flooring overlaid with sand to absorb blood and provide secure footing for combat. Beneath this surface lay the Hypogeum, an elaborate underground complex that represented perhaps the most sophisticated piece of ancient entertainment technology ever constructed. This subterranean maze extended 2 levels below the arena floor and contained an intricate network of corridors, chambers, storage areas, and mechanical systems designed to support the complex logistics of gladiatorial game. The Hypogeum's design incorporated 32 animal lifts strategically positioned around the arena perimeter, each capable of raising wild beasts, gladiators, or elaborate stage sets from the underground chambers to arena level through trapdoors concealed beneath the sand. These lifts operated through a counterweight system that allowed relatively small numbers of workers to raise extremely heavy loads with precise timing. The most sophisticated lifts could elevate entire stage sets complete with artificial trees, rocks, and architectural elements to create elaborate hunting scenarios or mythological tableaux. The underground chambers of the Hypogeum included specialized holding areas for different categories of performers and animals. Gladiators awaited their contests in secure cells equipped with basic amenities, while exotic animals occupied reinforced cages designed to contain everything from lions and tigers to elephants and rhinos. The animal holding areas featured sophisticated drainage systems, feeding mechanisms, and ventilation shafts that maintained adequate air quality in the confined underground spaces. The mechanical systems within the Hypogeum extended beyond simple lifts to include complex stage machinery capable of creating dramatic scenic effects. Retractable barriers could be raised or lowered to divide the arena into separate combat zones, while concealed water channels allowed for the flooding of portions of the arena floor for namachaya or naval battle recreation. The engineering challenges of creating watertight seals at the required scale demanded innovative solutions using lead sheets, hydraulic cement and precisely fitted stone joints. The arena's capacity to stage namachaya represented one of its most impressive technical achievements. These naval battle recreations required flooding the arena to a depth sufficient for small warships while maintaining structural integrity and ensuring adequate drainage afterward. The water supply came from a dedicated aqueduct branch that could deliver thousands of gallons per minute, while drainage occurred through large outlets connected to Rome's sewer system. The seating arrangement within the Flavian amphitheatre reflected and reinforced Roman social hierarchy through a carefully structured system that placed each spectator according to their social status and legal standing. The podium, the lowest seating tier, was reserved for senators, magistrates, and other high-ranking officials who occupied marble seats with individual armrests and back support. This section featured the Imperial box, an elaborate marble pavilion where the emperor and his immediate family watched the games while protected by Praetorian guards and separated from the general population. The Menaenium Primum contained seats for the equestrian class, wealthy citizens who met specific property requirements but lacked senatorial rank. These wooden seats with basic cushions provided excellent views of the arena while maintaining clear social distinction from the senatorial section below. The equestrian section included reserved areas for specific groups, such as military tribunes, wealthy freedmen and foreign dignitaries whose status warranted special recognition but who remained outside the formal Roman aristocracy. The Menaenium's secundum accommodated ordinary Roman citizens, divided into lower and upper sections based on economic status and social standing. The lower portion housed prosperous plebeians, skilled craftsmen and successful merchants who could afford better seats, while the upper section contained poorer citizens who received free admission but occupied the least desirable viewing position. The wooden benches in these sections lacked individual armrests and provided minimal comfort during the lengthy programs that could extend from dawn to dusk. The Menaenium summum at the amphitheatre's highest level was reserved for women, slaves, and foreigners who were permitted to attend but occupied the most distant seats from the action. The legal framework governing amphitheatre seating arrangements stemmed from Augustus's Lex Julia Theatralis, which codified social distinctions within entertainment venues and established penalties for violations of seating protocol. This legislation designated specific sections for different social classes while creating enforcement mechanisms that included fines, public humiliation and temporary banishment from games for those who attempted to occupy seats above their station. The amphitheatre's crowd control systems extended beyond seating arrangements to encompass entry and exit procedures designed to manage the movement of up to 50,000 spectators safely and efficiently. The building featured 80 ground-level entrances, each numbered and designated for specific seating sections to prevent confusion and overcrowding. The entrance system allowed the entire amphitheatre to fill or empty within approximately 15 minutes, a remarkable achievement given the era's limited understanding of crowd dynamics and the absence of modern safety protocol. The regional amphitheatres constructed throughout the Roman Empire adapted the Flavian amphitheatre's innovations to local conditions, resources and audience sizes while maintaining the essential features that defined Roman arena entertainment. The amphitheatre at Capua, traditionally considered the birthplace of gladiatorial schools, predated the Colosseum by several decades and served as a testing ground for many architectural and mechanical innovations later incorporated into the Roman structure. The Capuan amphitheatre measured approximately 560 feet by 460 feet, making it the second largest in the Roman world after the Flavian amphitheatre. Its underground complex, while less elaborate than Rome's Hypogeum, included animal holding areas, gladiator preparation chambers, and mechanical lifts, capable of delivering performers and stage elements to the arena floor. The building's proximity to major gladiatorial schools made it a natural venue for training exhibitions and professional development opportunities for fighters preparing for careers in larger venues. The amphitheatre at Pompeii, preserved by the volcanic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, provides the most complete archaeological evidence of provincial arena construction and operation.
Built around 70 BCE, this structure represents one of the earliest permanent stone amphitheaters and demonstrates the rapid spread of gladiatorial architecture throughout Roman territory. The building's capacity of approximately 20,000 spectators served a city population of roughly 15,000, indicating that games drew audiences from surrounding communities and represented major regional entertainment events. The Pompeian amphitheater's design reflected local adaptations of Roman architectural principles, including the use of natural hillside contours to reduce construction costs and provide stable foundations for the seating tiers.
The sophisticated gladiatorial networks that had connected the empire's entertainment centers began facing their most formidable challenge, not from barbarian invasions or economic collapse, but from a growing religious movement that fundamentally rejected the moral foundations of arena spectacle. The rise of Christianity during the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE created an unprecedented theological opposition to gladiatorial combat that would ultimately prove more destructive to the institution than any military defeat or financial crisis. The Christian critique of gladiatorial games struck at the heart of Roman cultural identity, challenging not merely the entertainment value of arena spectacles, but the entire system of values that had sustained gladiatorial culture for over 4 centuries. The earliest Christian opposition to gladiatorial games emerged from theological principles that viewed human life as sacred and divinely created, making the deliberate killing of human beings for entertainment purposes fundamentally incompatible with Christian doctrine. The Apostolic Fathers, writing during the late 1st and early 2nd centuries CE, established the foundational Christian position that participation in or attendance at gladiatorial games constituted a form of murder by proxy, implicating spectators in the bloodshed they witnessed and enjoyed. This theological stance created immediate practical problems for Christian converts who lived in cities where gladiatorial games formed essential elements of social and political life. Tertullian of Carthage, writing around 1907 CE in his treatise, De Specta, provided the most comprehensive early Christian condemnation of gladiatorial entertainment, combining theological arguments with detailed observations of arena culture that demonstrated his intimate familiarity with the spectacles he opposed. Tertullian argued that gladiatorial games violated multiple Christian principles simultaneously. They celebrated violence and death, encouraged bloodlust and cruelty among spectators, honored pagan gods through their religious ceremony, and created social hierarchies based on the ability to provide expensive entertainment rather than Christian virtues of humility and charity. Tertullian's analysis of gladiatorial spectatorship revealed sophisticated understanding of the psychological mechanisms that made arena entertainment compelling for Roman audience. He observed that spectators experienced vicarious participation in the violence they witnessed, developing emotional investments in particular fighters and outcomes that transformed them from passive observers into active participants in the bloodshed. This psychological involvement, according to Tertullian, corrupted the souls of Christian spectators by encouraging them to take pleasure in human suffering and death, directly contradicting Christ's teachings about love, compassion, and the sanctity of human life. The practical implications of Christian opposition to gladiatorial games created significant challenges for early Christian communities, particularly those located in major urban centers where arena entertainment formed integral parts of social and economic life. Christian merchants who refused to participate in the commercial activities surrounding gladiatorial games found themselves excluded from lucrative business opportunities, while Christian officials who declined to sponsor or attend games faced political marginalization and potential persecution. These economic and social pressures forced many Christians to choose between their religious convictions and their material prosperity. The persecution of Christians under various emperors during the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE ironically provided the most dramatic demonstrations of Christian opposition to gladiatorial value, as Christian martyrs in arena settings embodied principles that directly challenged the entertainment culture surrounding them. Unlike gladiators who fought for survival, glory, or financial reward, Christian martyrs entered arenas with the explicit intention of dying for their religious beliefs, transforming spaces designed for entertainment into venues for religious witness and spiritual triumph. The martyrdom of Saints Perpetua and Felicity in the amphitheater at Carthage in 23 CE exemplified the Christian challenge to gladiatorial culture through their deliberate rejection of the entertainment values that arena spectacles represented. Perpetua, a young noblewoman who had converted to Christianity, refused multiple opportunities to renounce her faith and avoid execution, instead using her trial and imprisonment to demonstrate Christian principles of courage, faith, and devotion to spiritual rather than worldly value. Her detailed prison diary, one of the earliest Christian texts written by a woman, provided insights into the psychological and spiritual preparation that distinguished Christian martyrs from gladiatorial fighters. The arena execution of Christian martyrs created complex dynamics that both reinforced and undermined gladiatorial culture simultaneously. Roman authorities intended these executions to demonstrate the consequences of rejecting imperial authority and traditional religious practices, using the familiar arena setting to maximize the educational impact of public punishment. However, the martyrs' behavior often subverted these intentions by providing examples of courage and dignity that impressed spectators while challenging the values that gladiatorial entertainment promoted. The Christian martyrs' refusal to fight back against their executioners or wild animals created stark contrasts with gladiatorial behavior that highlighted fundamental differences between Christian and Roman approaches to death and honor. While gladiators fought desperately for survival and demonstrated their worth through combat skill and courage in the face of death, Christian martyrs embraced death willingly, while maintaining peaceful demeanors and forgiving attitudes toward their persecutors. These behavioral differences created powerful visual demonstrations of alternative value systems that resonated with some spectators, while confusing or disturbing others who expected arena participants to conform to established gladiatorial tradition. The conversion of Constantine and the subsequent legalization of Christianity through the Edict of Milan in 313 CE marked the beginning of the end for gladiatorial games, though the process of elimination would extend over more than a century, as established cultural practices proved resistant to immediate change. Constantine's personal attitude toward gladiatorial games reflected the complex negotiations between Christian principles and Roman political realities that characterized the early Christian empire. While the emperor publicly embraced Christian values and supported church leaders who condemned arena violence, he continued to sponsor gladiatorial games when political circumstances required such demonstrations of imperial generosity and traditional Roman value. Constantine's legislation regarding gladiatorial games revealed the gradual nature of Christian influence on imperial policy and the practical difficulties of eliminating deeply entrenched cultural institutions. His laws restricted certain aspects of gladiatorial combat while preserving others, creating compromises that satisfied neither Christian critics nor traditional Roman audience. The emperor banned the branding of condemned criminals on their faces, arguing that human beings created in God's image should not be permanently disfigured, but he continued to allow their execution in arena settings under other circumstances. The economic factors contributing to gladiatorial decline during the 3rd and 4th centuries CE created practical pressures that reinforced Christian moral opposition while making arena entertainment increasingly difficult to sustain. The costs associated with maintaining gladiatorial school, procuring exotic animals, and staging elaborate spectacles had always represented substantial financial burdens for sponsors, but these expenses became prohibitive as imperial revenues declined due to military pressures, administrative inefficiency, and economic disruption caused by civil wars and barbarian invasions. The inflation that characterized the later Roman Empire made gladiatorial games economically unsustainable for all but the wealthiest sponsors, effectively limiting arena entertainment to imperially sponsored events and the most important religious festivals. Provincial cities that had maintained regular gladiatorial programs for centuries found themselves unable to afford the costs of importing fighters, purchasing animals, and maintaining amphitheater facilities. Augustine of Hippo, writing during the late 4th and early 5th centuries, provided theological sophistication to Christian opposition to gladiatorial games that went beyond earlier moral condemnations to address fundamental philosophical questions about human nature, social organization, and the proper relationship between temporal and spiritual authority. Augustine's analysis of gladiatorial culture in his Confessions and City of God revealed deep understanding of the psychological and social functions
functions that arena entertainment served in Roman society, while demonstrating why these functions were incompatible with Christian civilization. Augustine's personal experience with gladiatorial culture, gained during his youth in North Africa, where arena entertainment remained popular despite growing Christian influence, provided him with detailed knowledge of the spectacles he criticized and the social dynamics they created. His famous account of his friend Alypius's addiction to gladiatorial games illustrated the psychological mechanisms that made arena entertainment compelling, while demonstrating the spiritual dangers that Christian leaders associated with such spectacle. Augustine's description of Alypius being drawn back to gladiatorial attendance, despite his intellectual opposition, revealed the powerful emotional and social pressures that sustained arena culture even among educated individuals who understood its moral problems. The theological framework that Augustine developed for understanding gladiatorial games emphasized their role in promoting and celebrating the fallen human nature that Christianity sought to redeem through divine grace. Augustine argued that the pleasure spectators derived from witnessing violence and death reflected the corruption of human nature caused by original sin, making gladiatorial games symptoms of humanity's spiritual sickness rather than harmless entertainment. This analysis provided Christian leaders with sophisticated theoretical justifications for opposing arena culture, while offering alternative explanations for the psychological needs that gladiatorial games had traditionally satisfied.
The martyrdom of Saint Telemachus around 404 CE provided the dramatic culmination of Christian opposition to gladiatorial games and the immediate catalyst for their formal prohibition throughout the empire. Telemachus, a monk from Asia Minor, traveled to Rome specifically to protest gladiatorial combat by entering the arena during games sponsored by Emperor Honorius and attempting to separate fighting gladiators. The crowd's violent reaction to his intervention, which resulted in his death by stoning, created a public relations crisis for imperial authorities, while providing Christian leaders with a powerful symbol of their opposition to arena violence. The circumstances surrounding Telemachus's martyrdom revealed the continuing popularity of gladiatorial games among Roman audiences despite decades of Christian influence and imperial discouragement. The crowd's fury at the monk's interference demonstrated that many Romans still viewed gladiatorial combat as legitimate entertainment that should not be subject to religious criticism, while their willingness to kill someone who opposed the games indicated the depth of emotional investment that arena culture continued to command. This popular resistance to Christian moral reform highlighted the challenges facing imperial authorities, who sought to balance Christian principles with traditional Roman cultural expectations. Emperor Honorius's response to Telemachus's martyrdom reflected the complex political calculations that characterized imperial policy toward gladiatorial games during the Christian Empire. The emperor's formal prohibition of gladiatorial combat, issued shortly after the monk's death, represented both a genuine response to Christian moral pressure and a pragmatic recognition that gladiatorial games had become more politically costly than beneficial. The prohibition allowed Honorius to demonstrate his Christian commitment, while eliminating an expensive form of entertainment that had become increasingly difficult to sustain financially. The implementation of Honorius's gladiatorial prohibition revealed the practical difficulties of eliminating deeply entrenched cultural practices through imperial decree. While the formal ban ended official sponsorship of gladiatorial games in major imperial venues, underground and unofficial contests continued in various forms throughout the 5th century. Provincial authorities often ignored or selectively enforced the prohibition, particularly in regions where gladiatorial culture remained popular and economically important. These enforcement challenges demonstrated that cultural change required more than legal prohibition to be effective. The transformation of amphitheaters throughout the empire, during the 5th and 6th centuries CE, provided physical evidence of gladiatorial culture's decline and the broader changes affecting Roman urban life. The Colosseum in Rome, which had served as the premier venue for imperial gladiatorial spectacles, gradually fell into disuse as imperial resources were diverted to more pressing military and administrative needs. The building's underground chambers, which had once housed gladiators and exotic animals, were converted to workshops, storage facilities, and residential spaces as the city's population adapted the structure to new purposes. The conversion of amphitheaters into Christian churches represented the most symbolic transformation of former gladiatorial venues, as these buildings were redesigned to serve the religious movement that had opposed their original purpose. The amphitheatre at Arles in southern Gaul was partially converted into a church during the 6th century CE, with altars and religious decorations replacing the arena floor where gladiators had once fought. These conversions required substantial architectural modifications that eliminated the underground facilities and mechanical systems designed for gladiatorial spectacles while creating appropriate spaces for Christian worship and community gathering. The fortification of amphitheaters during the barbarian invasions demonstrated another adaptive use for these massive stone structures, as their solid construction and strategic locations made them valuable defensive positions during times of military crisis. The amphitheater at Nîmes was converted into a fortress during the 5th century CE, with residential buildings constructed within the arena and defensive walls added to the existing structure. These military adaptations preserved the buildings while completely eliminating their original entertainment functions, creating new urban landscapes that reflected the changing priorities and circumstances of post-Roman society. The residential conversion of amphitheaters created unique urban environments where families lived within structures that had once hosted gladiatorial spectacles, transforming spaces of public entertainment into private domestic settings. The amphitheater at Lucca in northern Italy was gradually filled with houses and workshops during the medieval period, creating a circular neighborhood that preserved the building's original outline while serving completely different social functions. These residential adaptations demonstrated the practical value of amphitheater construction while creating living reminders of the gladiatorial culture that had once flourished within their walls. The economic networks that had stained gladiatorial culture gradually dissolved as demand for arena entertainment declined and alternative forms of public spectacle gained popularity. The gladiatorial schools that had trained thousands of fighters closed their doors as imperial sponsorship ended, and private demand disappeared, forcing former trainers and support personnel to seek employment in other industries. The craftsmen who had specialized in producing gladiatorial equipment adapted their skills to military applications or civilian products, while animal traders shifted their focus to supplying circuses, private collector and other entertainment venues that continued operating despite the decline of arena combat. The cultural memory of gladiatorial games that persisted through medieval literature and Christian condemnation would eventually be transformed into tangible archaeological evidence when Mount Vesuvius revealed its perfectly preserved secrets in the 18th century. The excavation of Pompeii, beginning in 1748, provided historians with an unprecedented window into the daily reality of gladiatorial life, moving beyond literary accounts and moral treatises to reveal the actual living conditions, training methods, and social dynamics that had characterized provincial gladiatorial culture during the empire's height. The gladiator barracks discovered in Pompeii's Regio Veii offered the most complete archaeological evidence of gladiatorial housing and training facilities ever uncovered. The rectangular compound, measuring approximately 180 feet by 1115 feet, contained 71 small cells arranged around a central courtyard where fighters had practiced their combat techniques on the morning of August. Each cell measured roughly 10 feet by 12 feet, providing basic accommodation for 1 or 2 gladiators along with their personal possessions and equipment. The cell's modest dimensions reflected the utilitarian approach to gladiatorial housing, prioritizing security and efficient use of space over comfort or privacy. The central training area within the Pompeian barracks revealed sophisticated understanding of gladiatorial instruction methods through the discovery of multiple wooden training posts embedded in the courtyard floor at precisely measured intervals. These posts, preserved by the volcanic ash that destroyed the city, showed wear patterns consistent with repeated sword strikes and shield impacts, indicating intensive daily training sessions that had continued until the eruption interrupted normal activity. The spacing between posts suggested systematic training routines that allowed multiple gladiators to practice simultaneously without interfering with each other's movements. The weapons cache discovered in the barracks armory contained 18 helmets, 15 shields and numerous swords in various stages of repair, providing detailed information about gladiatorial equipment standards and maintenance procedure. The helmets included examples of Secutor, Murmello, and Thraix types, each showing evidence of combat damage, and subsequent repairs that indicated their use in actual arena contests rather than training exercise. The shields bore painted decorations and reinforcement patches that revealed both the aesthetic and practical considerations that governed gladiatorial equipment design. The gladiatorial graffiti preserved on Pompeii's walls throughout the city provided intimate insights into the social relationships and popular culture surrounding arena and entertainment. Over 200 gladiatorial inscriptions have been documented, ranging from simple fighter names and win-loss records to elaborate declarations of love and admiration from devoted fans. The graffiti revealed that gladiators maintained public personas that extended far beyond their arena performances, with successful fighters achieving celebrity status that attracted romantic attention and commercial endorsement. One particularly revealing inscription from a tavern wall near the amphitheater proclaimed, "Celadus the Thracian makes the girls sigh," indicating that gladiatorial fame translated into sexual appeal and social influence within the broader community. Similar inscriptions documented the romantic relationships between gladiators and local women, including both slaves and free citizens who were attracted to the fighters' combination of physical prowess, courage, and exotic appeal. These relationships challenged traditional Roman social hierarchies, while creating personal connections that humanized gladiators beyond their roles as arena entertainers. The medical evidence preserved in the gladiator barracks included surgical instruments, pharmaceutical preparations, and treatment facilities that demonstrated the sophisticated healthcare provided to professional fighters. The discovery of a complete surgical kit containing bone saws, forceps, and specialized probes indicated that gladiatorial physicians could perform complex operations including amputations, tumor removals, and the extraction of embedded weapon fragments. The pharmaceutical materials included imported medicines and exotic treatments that exceeded the medical care available to most Roman citizens, reflecting the substantial economic investment represented by trained gladiators. The skeletal remains of gladiators discovered in the barracks and cemetery areas provided unprecedented opportunities for modern forensic analysis that revealed detailed information about fighter demographics, training effects, and combat injury. Examination of over 80 gladiatorial skeletons using contemporary archaeological techniques demonstrated that most fighters began their careers between ages 18 and 25, with average career lengths of approximately 3 to 5 years before death or retirement. The skeletal evidence indicated that gladiators typically came from robust populations rather than the malnourished slave populations that some historical accounts had suggested. The bone analysis revealed distinctive patterns of muscle development and joint stress that reflected the specific physical demands of different gladiatorial specialization. Retiarius skeletons showed pronounced development of the shoulder and arm muscles used for net casting and trident work, while secutor remains displayed the leg and core strengthening associated with aggressive pursuit tactics and heavy armor use. These physical adaptations provided scientific confirmation of the specialized training methods described in literary sources, while revealing the intensity of gladiatorial conditioning program. The combat injury patterns preserved in gladiatorial skeletons offered detailed insights into arena fighting techniques and the effectiveness of different weapons and armor combinations. Skull injuries were surprisingly rare, indicating that gladiatorial helmets provided effective protection for the head and face, while arm and leg wounds were common and often showed evidence of successful healing that allowed fighters to continue their career. The skeletal evidence suggested that gladiatorial combat, while certainly dangerous, was less uniformly fatal than popular imagination had assumed, with many fighters surviving multiple contests and living to retirement age. The dietary analysis of gladiatorial remains through isotope studies revealed that fighters maintained high-protein diets that included substantial quantities of meat, fish and dairy products, supplemented with grains and vegetables. This nutritional evidence contradicted historical accounts that described gladiators as primarily vegetarian, suggesting instead that their diets were carefully designed to support the muscle development and rapid healing required for intensive combat training. The isotopic signatures also indicated that many gladiators had traveled extensively before arriving in Pompeii, supporting literary evidence about the mobility of professional fighters throughout the Roman world. The medieval revival of interest in gladiatorial culture began during the 12th century when European scholars rediscovered classical texts that described Roman arena entertainment in detail. The works of Tertullian,
Augustine and other Christian writers who had condemned gladiatorial games provided medieval readers with vivid descriptions of arena spectacles, while reinforcing Christian interpretations of their moral significance. These rediscovered texts influenced medieval literature, art, and historical scholarship by providing authentic classical sources about Roman culture and society. The medieval tournament culture that emerged during the 12th and 13th centuries drew conscious inspiration from gladiatorial traditions, while adapting ancient combat forms to contemporary feudal values and Christian moral framework. Medieval knights and nobles who sponsored tournaments explicitly referenced Roman gladiatorial games as precedents for their own martial entertainments, though they modified the ancient practices to emphasize honor, chivalry, and religious devotion rather than simple survival and popular entertainment. The tournament regulations developed by medieval authorities reflected both admiration for Roman gladiatorial organization and determination to avoid the moral problems that Christian writers had identified in ancient arena culture. The Renaissance witnessed an explosion of scholarly and artistic interest in gladiatorial culture as humanist scholars gained access to additional classical sources, and archaeological discoveries began revealing physical evidence of Roman arena entertainment. The publication of comprehensive editions of classical authors, including Suetonius, Tacitus, and Pliny, provided Renaissance readers with detailed accounts of gladiatorial games, while archaeological excavations in Rome and other Italian cities uncovered amphitheater ruin, gladiatorial equipment, and inscriptions that confirmed and expanded the literary evidence. Renaissance artists found in gladiatorial subjects compelling opportunities to demonstrate their mastery of human anatomy, dramatic composition, and classical themes that appealed to educated patrons familiar with ancient literature. Painters like Giulio Romano and sculptors like Gian Lorenzo Bernini created works that depicted gladiatorial combat with anatomical accuracy and emotional intensity that reflected both their artistic skills and their scholarly understanding of classical sources. These Renaissance artworks established visual traditions for representing gladiatorial culture that would influence European art for centuries. The scholarly apparatus developed by Renaissance humanists for studying gladiatorial culture established methodological approaches that anticipated modern historical research techniques. Scholars like Justus Lipsius and Johannes Rosinus compiled comprehensive surveys of classical evidence about gladiatorial games, while attempting to reconcile contradictory sources and fill gaps in the historical record through logical analysis and comparative study. Their work created systematic knowledge bases that served as foundations for subsequent research, while demonstrating the potential for rigorous historical scholarship about ancient entertainment culture.
The Enlightenment period brought new analytical approaches to gladiatorial studies, as scholars applied rationalist philosophy and empirical methods to understanding Roman arena culture. Edward Gibbon's monumental Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire included detailed analysis of gladiatorial games as symptoms of Roman moral decay and political dysfunction, while Montesquieu and other political theorists used gladiatorial culture as evidence for broader arguments about the relationship between government systems and social values. These Enlightenment interpretations established gladiatorial games as important topics for historical and political analysis, rather than merely antiquarian curiosity. The archaeological revolution of the 19th century transformed gladiatorial studies by providing systematic methods for excavating and analyzing physical evidence of Roman arena culture. The scientific excavation of Pompeii and Herculaneum revealed unprecedented details about gladiatorial daily life while establishing archaeological techniques that could be applied to amphitheater sites throughout the former Roman Empire. German scholars like Heinrich Schliemann and Adolf Furtwangen pioneered systematic approaches to excavating and documenting gladiatorial sites that established standards for subsequent archaeological research. The development of modern forensic archaeology during the 20th century revolutionized understanding of gladiatorial culture by applying scientific analysis techniques to skeletal remains and other physical evidence. X-ray analysis, chemical testing, and statistical methods allowed researchers to extract detailed information about gladiatorial demographics, health, diet, and combat injuries that had been impossible to determine from literary sources alone. These scientific approaches transformed gladiatorial studies from primarily literary and artistic pursuits into rigorous interdisciplinary research programs that combined historical, archaeological, and scientific methods. Contemporary archaeological research continues revealing new insights into gladiatorial culture through innovative analysis techniques and previously unexplored sites throughout the former Roman Empire. Recent excavations at gladiatorial schools in Austria, Turkey, and North Africa have uncovered evidence of training methods, equipment innovations, and cultural adaptations that expand understanding of how gladiatorial traditions spread and evolved throughout Roman territory. These discoveries demonstrate that gladiatorial culture was more diverse and sophisticated than earlier research had suggested. The application of computer modeling and virtual reality technologies to gladiatorial research has created new possibilities for understanding arena architecture, crowd dynamics, and combat techniques. Through digital reconstruction and simulation, researchers can now create detailed three-dimensional models of amphitheaters that allow virtual exploration of underground chambers, mechanical systems, and seating arrangements while testing hypotheses about how these structures function during actual events. These technological approaches complement traditional archaeological methods, while providing new tools for analyzing and presenting research findings. The enduring cultural impact of gladiatorial imagery in contemporary media reflects the continuing fascination with Roman arena culture and its themes of courage, conflict, and survival under extreme circumstances. Hollywood films from Spartacus to Gladiator have introduced gladiatorial culture to global audiences, while interpreting ancient entertainment through modern cinematic techniques and contemporary moral framework. These popular presentations, while often historically inaccurate in details, have maintained public interest in gladiatorial culture and generated support for continued archaeological research and historical storage. The influence of gladiatorial imagery on contemporary sports entertainment demonstrates the continuing appeal of controlled combat spectacles and psychological dynamics that made Roman arena entertainment compelling for ancient audiences. Professional wrestling, mixed martial arts, and other combat sports consciously adopt gladiatorial themes and presentation styles, while adapting ancient entertainment forms to modern safety standards and legal framework. These contemporary adaptations reveal the enduring human fascination with ritualized combat and social functions that such entertainment serves across different cultural contexts. The modern understanding of gladiatorial culture as a complex social institution rather than simple brutal entertainment reflects the cumulative impact of centuries of historical research, archaeological discovery, and analytical storage. Contemporary historians recognize gladiatorial games as sophisticated responses to specific social, political, and economic conditions within Roman society, while acknowledging their genuine entertainment value and cultural significance. This nuanced understanding avoids both romantic glorification and simplistic condemnation, while recognizing the historical importance of gladiatorial culture within the broader context of Roman civilization. The preservation and presentation of gladiatorial sites as cultural heritage locations demonstrates the continuing relevance of Roman arena culture for contemporary society and education. The Colosseum in Rome, amphitheaters throughout Europe and North Africa, and museum collections of gladiatorial artifacts serve as tangible connections to ancient entertainment culture, while providing opportunities for public education about Roman history and society. These preservation efforts ensure that future generations will have access to physical evidence of gladiatorial culture while maintaining the sites and artifacts necessary for continued research and discovery. The legacy of gladiatorial culture extends far beyond its immediate historical context to encompass fundamental questions about human nature, social organization, and the relationship between entertainment and violence that remain relevant in contemporary society. The Roman experience with gladiatorial games provides historical perspective on modern debates about violent entertainment, the ethics of combat sports, and the social functions of public spectacle, while demonstrating both the appeal and the dangers of institutionalized violence as entertainment. This historical perspective enriches contemporary discussions, while providing concrete examples of how societies have grappled with similar issues across different time periods and cultural contexts. The gladiatorial legacy ultimately represents a complex intersection of human creativity, social organization, and moral challenge that continues to resonate with contemporary audiences, seeking to understand both ancient Roman society and their own cultural value. The arena fighters who once battled for survival and glory in amphitheaters throughout the Roman Empire have become symbols of courage, skill, and the human capacity for both cruelty and nobility under extreme circumstances. Their story, preserved in stone monuments, archaeological remains, cultural memory, serves as a permanent reminder of humanity's capacity for both spectacular achievement and troubling moral compromise, ensuring that the gladiatorial experience will continue to inform and challenge future generations as they grapple with their own questions about entertainment, violence, and the values that define civilized society. In the end, the gladiators were more than mere entertainers or tragic victims. They were participants in one of history's most complex cultural phenomena, a system that revealed fundamental truths about power, spectacle, and the human condition that echo through the ages. From the sacred groves of Etruria to the marble arenas of Imperial Rome, from the blood-soaked sands of countless amphitheaters to the digital reconstructions of modern scholarship, their legacy endures as a testament to the enduring power of courage in the face of death and the eternal human fascination with the ultimate contest between life and mortality. This has been Dust and Glory. Until our next journey into the epic sweep of human history, remember that every civilization leaves its mark in the arena of time, and the echoes of ancient courage still resonate in the struggles we face today.